When most people think about Alzheimer's disease, what comes to mind? Forgetting your children's names, not recognizing your spouse of 40 years, not knowing where you are in your own home. But what if I told you that Alzheimer's doesn't only attack your memory? That long before you forget your own address, your body is already sending physical signals that can be seen, felt, and recognized by anyone who knows what to look for. Signals that show up in your nose, in your hands, in the way you walk, in the way you smell your morning coffee. And here is what nobody tells you. These signals appear 10, sometimes 15 years before any noticeable memory loss. There is a real window of time to act, and most people let that window close without ever realizing it was open. I'm Dr. Nova Blake, and I've been practicing medicine for over 30 years. Today I'm going to show you the 7 physical and mental signs that separate normal aging from the silent beginning of Alzheimer's disease. I'm going to show you what science has discovered about how this disease manifests in the body before it attacks memory. And at the end, I'm going to reveal a discovery that may be the biggest relief you receive today, because not every mental fog is Alzheimer's. There is a very common, very treatable cause that mimics Alzheimer's perfectly, but can be resolved in days with a simple blood test. Stay with me until the end. Before anything else, the essential disclaimer. This video is educational and informational. If you recognize any of these signals in yourself or a family member, the right step is a consultation with a specialist, a geriatrician or neurologist. Not panic, not resignation, a professional evaluation. Now let's understand the enemy. Because to stop being afraid of something, you first need to understand what it is, what Alzheimer's is, and how it begins. Alzheimer's is not simply a disease of memory. It is a disease of the entire brain that begins silently, decades before the first visible symptoms appear, with a process of destruction that advances cell by cell, connection by connection, invisibly. Let me explain this in a way that will stay with you. Think of the brain as an enormous city with millions of roads connecting different neighborhoods. Each road is a connection between neurons. Along those roads travel the electrical and chemical signals that allow you to think, remember, move, feel, smell, and understand the world around you. Alzheimer's begins with the accumulation of a protein called beta amyloid. Think of it like molecular rust. This rust starts depositing on the roads of the brain, first in small amounts, then in larger amounts. The roads become obstructed. Signals no longer travel with the same speed. Connections begin to fail. And here is what is critical to understand. This rust does not begin in the memory areas. It begins in areas that control smell, balance, fine hand movements, and spatial perception. These are the areas attacked first. This is exactly why the earliest signs of Alzheimer's appear in the nose, the hands, the way a person walks, and not in memory. Memory is attacked later, when too much time has already passed. There is a second process that happens simultaneously. A protein called tau, which normally serves as a rail for transporting nutrients inside neurons, begins to deform. These rails collapse. Neurons stop receiving nutrition. They die. And dead neurons do not come back. But here is the good news that science has given us over the last 2 decades. There is a long window, 10 to 15 years, between the beginning of this process and the moment the disease becomes clinically evident with memory loss. And in this window, the signals are there, in the body, visible, for those who know where to look. Now let's go to the signals. Signal number 7. Loss or reduction of smell without obvious cause. I start with number 7 because it is chronologically the first. It is the earliest signal, the most documented, and the most ignored of all. Do you still smell the coffee when it is brewing? Do you notice when food is starting to go bad? Can you smell the flowers in the garden? The area of the brain responsible for processing odours is called the olfactory bulb. And the olfactory bulb is one of the first brain structures to be affected by beta-amyloid protein deposition. Researchers at Columbia University in New York found that changes in the olfactory bulb can be detected at autopsy in Alzheimer's patients up to 20 years before clinical diagnosis. 20 years. This means that the gradual reduction of smell is one of the earliest signals that exists. A signal the body sends with enormous advance notice if we knew how to recognize it. How do you distinguish Alzheimer's-related smell loss from other causes? There are other common reasons for smell loss. Frequent colds and respiratory infections, chronic rhinitis, nasal polyps, thyroid problems. The difference is that Alzheimer's-related smell loss is gradual, progressive, not associated with nasal symptoms, and persists even when there is no active respiratory problem. A simple test you can do right now. Go to your kitchen. Get some cinnamon, ground coffee, a piece of orange or lemon. Smell each one with your eyes closed. Is the intensity of the smell the same as it was 5 years ago? 10 years ago? If you or someone in your family has noticed a gradual reduction in the ability to smell over the past year, 2 years, 3 years, without a clear nasal explanation, this deserves medical attention. Not panic, attention. Signal number 6. Changes in the way of walking. This signal is one that surprises families the most when it appears, because it seems completely disconnected from the idea of a brain disease. The person always walked normally, always had good balance, always went up and down stairs without thinking. And then something changes. The steps become shorter. The feet begin to shuffle on the floor, as if there is a fear of fully lifting the foot. Balance seems less secure. The person begins walking more slowly, more cautiously, sometimes with arms slightly out to the sides, as if seeking balance. The family sees this and thinks, they are getting weak. Their legs are weak. It must be arthritis, or osteoporosis, or low blood pressure. But science tells us something different. The Tilda study, conducted in Ireland with more than 8,000 adults over 50, found that changes in gait pattern, especially reduction in step length and increased variability in walking rhythm, are associated with a significantly higher risk of developing cognitive decline in the years that follow. Walking is not controlled only by muscles and joints. It is controlled by the brain, specifically by the cerebellum and the frontal lobes, which coordinate rhythm, balance, and the motor planning of each step. When these areas begin to be affected by Alzheimer's process, gait changes before memory does. The specific signal to observe is not general weakness. It is a change in the pattern. Someone who always walked with confident, long strides, and who begins taking short, shuffling steps without an obvious orthopedic cause, is showing a signal that deserves evaluation. I want to tell you about one of my patients. I will call him Gerald. He was 71 years old, a retired engineer from Columbus, Ohio. His daughter brought him to see me. She had noticed that her father had been walking differently for about 2 years, slower, with shorter steps. He thought it was his knee. He had been taking anti-inflammatories for months. When I conducted the complete neurological examination, the knees were fine. The problem was in the subtle signals the nervous system was showing. Cognitive tests revealed mild cognitive impairment, the stage that precedes Alzheimer's disease. We were in that precious time window. We began brain protection strategies immediately. Today, 2 years later, Gerald still lives independently, cooks for himself, and drives around his neighborhood. The window was used. Signal number 5. Difficulty with fine movements. The button test. This signal appears in the hands, and it is one of the most concrete and easiest to observe in daily life. Buttoning a shirt, tying a shoelace, inserting a key into a lock, using a fork with precision. These movements seem automatic because they have been performed literally thousands of times across a lifetime. The brain stored them as highly efficient motor programs that operate without any conscious concentration. When Alzheimer's begins to affect the parietal lobes, the areas responsible for integrating learned movements, these motor programs begin to fail. Hands that always knew exactly what to do suddenly hesitate. Fingers cannot execute with the same precision movements that were always automatic. The person tries to button their shirt and becomes frustrated because their fingers do not cooperate as before. Tries to tie a shoe and cannot make the bow with the usual ease. Drops objects more frequently, not because the hands are weaker, but because the command the brain sends is arriving less precisely. This signal is often accompanied by a general increase in everyday clumsiness. Knocking over glasses more often, bumping into furniture corners, having difficulty with the phone or remote control, with objects that were once handled without thinking. The practical observation. Notice if someone in the family has started wearing more elastic waist clothing instead of buttons. If they have switched to slip-on shoes or Velcro instead of laces. Often the adaptations happen before the problem is named. Signal number 4. Errors in distance and spatial perception. This is the signal that frightens families the most when it first appears, because it seems inexplicable. The person goes to place a glass on the table and releases it before it gets there. The glass falls and breaks. The family thinks it was carelessness, lack of attention. It happens again and again, and the family begins to worry, or the person begins tripping on steps they have climbed without difficulty for decades. They bump into door frames. They have difficulty parking the car in spaces that were always easy. What is happening is that Alzheimer's is affecting the parietal lobe, the area responsible for three-dimensional spatial perception. The brain is losing its ability to accurately calculate the distances between the body and the objects around it. Normally, when you go to place a glass on a table, your brain makes instantaneous and unconscious calculations of distance, speed, and force. It is like a highly sophisticated internal GPS system. When this system begins to fail, positioning errors appear. A study published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease showed that spatial perception tests can identify patients in the preclinical stage of Alzheimer's with significant accuracy, years before any memory symptoms appear. Spatial perception is one of the brain systems most precociously affected. If you or someone close to you is making these spatial calculation errors with increasing frequency, it is a signal worth investigating. Signal number 3. Repeating the same question or the same story. Now we enter the signals that involve memory and cognition more directly. And this is one of the most recognizable, but also one of the most misunderstood by families. I am not talking about forgetting something once in a while. I am talking about a specific pattern. The person asks a question, receives the answer, and minutes later asks the exact same question as if the previous conversation never happened. Or they tell the same story they told half an hour ago to the same person with exactly the same words, with no sign that they realize the repetition. What is happening is that short-term episodic memory, the ability to register recent events, is failing. It is as if the machine that records new memories has a defect. The conversation happens, but is not durably recorded. Minutes later, the record is no longer available, and the person repeats what they already did without knowing it. The crucial difference between normal forgetfulness and this signal: with normal forgetting, you forget where you left your glasses, but you remember that you had a conversation this afternoon. With Alzheimer's-related cognitive impairment, the person does not remember that the conversation happened at all. It is not the content that was lost. It is the record that the event occurred. This distinction is fundamental. Remembering the topic but forgetting the details is normal aging. Not registering that the topic was discussed is a different signal. Signal number 2. Storing objects in places that make no sense. Everyone has found their glasses on top of their own head. Everyone has searched for their phone while actually talking on it. These moments are normal and happen to people of all ages. What is not normal is the pattern that begins to appear in early Alzheimer's. The person puts the TV remote inside the refrigerator, the car keys inside the shoebox in the closet, the phone in the freezer, the shoe in the kitchen cabinet. And when they cannot find the object, instead of thinking that they themselves put it in the wrong place, they begin to accuse someone of having taken it. A sibling, a child, the housekeeper. The sick brain creates explanations to protect the person's sense of identity, because accepting that they themselves created this confusion would be devastating. This behavior has a clinical name: misidentification syndrome. It is not malice. It is not intentional accusation. It is the brain trying to create a coherent narrative for something it can no longer explain any other way. When families understand this, the relationship with their loved one changes completely. Patience replaces hurt. Compassion replaces frustration. Signal number 1. Getting lost in a familiar route. This is the most painful signal of all, and the one that most often brings families to seek urgent help. The person leaves home to go to the neighborhood pharmacy, a place they have been to hundreds of times, a route that has been part of their life for 20 years. And suddenly, 2 blocks from home, they stop. They look to the right and to the left. Everything seems strange. They do not know where they are, do not know how they got there, do not know which direction to take to get back home. The mental map that existed, built over decades of repetition, has simply been erased. This happens because the hippocampus, the brain structure most associated with the formation of spatial and navigational memories, is one of the earliest and most severely affected by Alzheimer's. Before forgetting faces and names, the hippocampus loses its GPS function, the ability to orient the person in space and time. This episode is terrifying for the person who experiences it. They know something is wrong. They feel the terror of not knowing where they are. And very often, they do not tell the family, afraid of losing their autonomy. It is essential to create a culture of openness in the family, where these episodes can be shared without judgment and without immediate consequences. Because the earlier these episodes reach medical knowledge, the earlier intervention can begin. Now I want to give you the news I promised at the beginning, the one that may be the biggest relief you receive today. the deficiency that perfectly mimics Alzheimer's. Every year, thousands of American families go through the terror of thinking a loved one has Alzheimer's, only to discover the problem is completely different and completely treatable. There is a very common vitamin deficiency in adults over 60 that can cause practically every symptom I described today. Mental confusion, memory loss, difficulty walking, tingling in the hands and feet, disorientation. That vitamin is B12. Vitamin B12 is essential for the production and maintenance of myelin, the sheath that surrounds and protects neurons, functioning like the insulation of an electrical wire. Without myelin, electrical signals in the brain and nerves disperse, slow down, and stop functioning with precision. After age 60, the stomach produces less intrinsic factor, the protein that enables B12 absorption. Many older adults take medications like omeprazole and other proton pump inhibitors that further reduce this absorption. The result is that B12 deficiency is far more common after 60 than most people realize. Studies estimate it affects between 10 and 30% of adults over 65 in the United States. The good news: it is diagnosed with a simple blood test, and with appropriate treatment, B12 injections or high-dose oral supplementation, the symptoms can improve dramatically. I had a patient, I will call him Edward. He was 74 years old, a retired farmer from rural Kentucky. His family brought him to me, convinced he had Alzheimer's. He was confused, disoriented, walking with difficulty, not recognizing some faces. The family was already planning for nursing home care. The blood test showed B12 below 150, severely deficient. We began weekly B12 injections. 6 weeks later, Edward was telling me stories about his farm with perfect detail and laughing about the whole situation. Not every confusion is Alzheimer's. Not every memory problem is dementia. But only a blood test can tell the difference. If someone in your family is experiencing cognitive or neurological symptoms, ask the doctor to include B12 levels as an absolute requirement before drawing any conclusions. Beyond B12, the thyroid can also mimic Alzheimer's. Hypothyroidism, when the thyroid produces insufficient hormones, causes mental slowness, forgetfulness, confusion, and depression, all symptoms that can be confused with early dementia. And it is treatable with a daily pill. The 3 golden rules to protect your brain. I want to leave you with something practical. 3 rules that modern neuroscience considers the most important for protecting the brain from aging. Rule number 1. Sleep deeply and consistently. Sleep is not only rest, it is the only window of time when the brain activates its cleaning system, called the glymphatic system. It is during deep sleep that cerebrospinal fluid flows through the brain and literally washes out the toxic proteins, including beta-amyloid, that accumulate during the day. People who sleep poorly chronically are allowing the rust to build up. 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep with deep sleep phases is not a luxury. It is mandatory brain maintenance. Rule number 2. Challenge your brain every day. The brain grows with challenge. Every time you learn something new, the brain forms new neural connections. Each new connection is cognitive reserve, an extra layer of protection against Alzheimer's. You do not need to take college courses. Learn 1 new word a day. Take a different route to the grocery store. Try cooking an unfamiliar recipe. Use an app you have never used before. Every new learning, however small, contributes to cognitive reserve. Rule number 3. Control your sugar. Modern science is calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. This is not a metaphor. It is an observation based on growing evidence that chronic excess glucose in the brain, resulting from a diet rich in sugar, white flour, and ultra-processed foods, causes inflammation and direct damage to neurons. The Mediterranean diet, rich in vegetables, olive oil, fish, nuts and legumes, with restriction of sugar and refined flour, is the diet with the greatest evidence of brain protection in the scientific literature. Cook more, process less. That advice, which sounds simple, may be protecting you from one of the most devastating diseases of aging. I want to close with something that has guided my practice for 30 years. The brain is the most extraordinary organ the human body possesses. It is the only organ that thinks about itself, that remembers the past, that imagines the future, that loves. Caring for it is not merely a medical act. It is an act of love for yourself and for the people who depend on you, being present, lucid, whole. The signals I showed you today are already there. They already existed. But now you know what they mean. And knowing what a signal means is the first and most important step toward not letting the window close. Tell me in the comments, which of these 7 signals surprised you the most? And have you recognized any of them in yourself or a family member? Write below. I read everything. If this video brought you something valuable, share it now in your family group chats. There are people right now suffering from B12 deficiency, thinking they are losing their minds, when the solution may be a simple injection. You could be the person who makes that difference. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do that now and turn on notifications. Every week, content like this, honest, practical, and science-based. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.